Beneath the mountains and deep in forgotten tunnels, there are beings that were never meant to be. We dive deep into ancient horrors, corrupted beasts, and creatures so terrifying that even Sauron feared them. This is every monster in The Lord of the Rings explained. The Nameless Things are the oldest, the most mysterious, and possibly the most terrifying. Tolkien barely wrote about them, but when he did, he described them as living deep beneath the misty mountains, far below the goblins, below the dwarves, below everything. They crawl in the dark. They don't speak. They don't think like us. All we know is that even Gandalf said they were older than Sauron, older than the elves, maybe even older than the world itself. He met them when he fell battling the Balrog. And if he doesn't want to talk about what he saw down there, maybe we shouldn't either. Long before the Fellowship, there were the Barrow Downs, quiet hills covered in grass and full of the dead. These were ancient kings and warriors, but their spirits were corrupted by dark magic. The Barrow-wights are the reason why nobody builds homes near the Barrow Downs anymore. They lurk in tombs, trapping travelers with enchantments and dragging them into cold stone chambers. You don't fight them, you just disappear. In the Fellowship of the Ring, Tom Bombadil rescues the hobbits from one of these creatures, but if he hadn't shown up, the journey would have ended right there in a grave. You've seen them in the movies, ghostly warriors who turn the tide of battle. But their real story is even darker. These were once human kings who promised to fight for Isildur against Sauron. But when the time came, they didn't. They hid, they broke their oath. So Isildur cursed them. They became wraiths, cursed to haunt the mountains and never know rest. No blade can touch them. No army can stop them. They only found peace when Aragorn, Isildur's heir, summoned them to fulfill their promise at the Battle of Pelennor Fields. Once their oath was fulfilled, they vanished. He's not just a twisted little cave creature, he is a monster, one that used to be human. Well, sort of. Gollum was once a Stoor hobbit named Smeagol, but the One Ring changed him. Slowly, it stretched his life, poisoned his mind, and made him retreat into darkness. Over hundreds of years, he became something else entirely, a predator. He lived in the roots of the misty mountains, hunted goblins, spoke in riddles, ate raw fish, and talked to himself more than anyone else. He wasn't evil in the traditional sense, he was just broken. And that made him one of Tolkien's most tragic monsters. Now we get to the stuff of nightmares. The Mewlips aren't in The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. They come from an eerie poem Tolkien wrote. And honestly, they might be one of the scariest things he ever imagined. They live in damp, dark places, far below swamps and deep beneath ruined cities. They wait in the silence and they eat people. They have pale, soft hands and massive eyes, and their laughter echoes in the dark long after their victims are gone. Are they real in Tolkien's world? Maybe. Maybe not. The poem might just be a warning tale told to frighten children in the Shire. But knowing Middle-earth, they're probably real and they're still waiting. Rarely mentioned, but horrifying if you catch it. Half-trolls fought alongside Sauron's forces in the later wars. They were strong, brutally strong, and bigger than any orc. Some say they were men twisted with troll blood. Others say they were bred in the east beyond the maps by dark sorcery. Whatever the truth, when the free people saw them on the battlefield, they thought they were seeing the end of the world. A cat? Are you serious? Yes, and not just any cat. Tevildo, the Prince of Cats, one of Tolkien's earliest villains from his earliest writings. He didn't make it into the final canon, but in the early drafts, Tevildo was a dark servant of Morgoth who commanded armies of giant evil cats. He could speak, plot, and stalk his prey with supernatural cunning. He had his own fortress, his own realm, and he hated humans. Eventually, this character evolved into Sauron, yes, the actual Sauron. But for a time, one of the most dangerous beings in Middle-earth was a cat. Terrifying? Maybe. Ridiculous? Most definitely, yes. But in a world with Balrogs and dragons, it somehow still fits. These are the worst trolls you can meet. Bred in the heart of Mordor, near Mount Doom. These trolls were said to have fire in their veins, hardened skin, eyes that glowed like embers. They didn't speak. They didn't care about orders. They just destroyed everything in their path. Some were armored, some were ridden like beasts. but all of them were monsters in the truest sense, products of a world completely corrupted. In Tolkien's world, werewolves aren't cursed humans. They're much, much worse. They're spirits of evil, Maiar, like Sauron himself, trapped in wolf-like bodies. Morgoth created them as terror machines. Think of them like living tanks with claws. One of the most terrifying was Draugluin, the father of werewolves. He served Sauron back when Sauron ruled a fortress called Tol in Gaurhoth, the Isle of Werewolves. It was his personal domain of terror. Even worse was Carcharoth, the Red Maw. We'll get to him later. Not just wolves, they are bigger, meaner, and smarter. Wargs were giant wolves that partnered with orcs in battle. They had their own intelligence, some could even speak. They weren't just mounts. They were predators who chose to work with orcs because it gave them more chances to kill. In The Hobbit, the company is nearly trapped by a pack of wargs. If the eagles hadn't come, they wouldn't have survived the night. They're not just walking trees, they're shepherds of the forest. Ents are one of the oldest races in Middle-earth. Ancient beings created by the gods to watch over all growing things. They look like trees, they move like trees, but they think, speak, and act with purpose. They were peaceful for most of history, slow to anger, slow to move. But when Saruman destroyed their forests at Isengard, they marched. In the Two Towers, the Ents led by Treebeard brought down the full fury of nature. They smashed through stone, flooded Isengard, and left no trace of Saruman's machines. They don't fight often, but when they do, you remember it. And if you think they're slow, you haven't seen one swing a tree like a club. And that's just the first wave of monsters. If you made it this far, you're either a Tolkien fan or just into terrifying creatures. Either way, good choice. Hit like and subscribe before a Barrow-wight drags you underground. Seriously, they're not picky. You thought spiders in your bathroom were scary? Shelob is the last child of Ungoliant. She lives in the mountains above Mordor in a tunnel called Cirith Ungol. She doesn't serve Sauron. She doesn't serve anyone. She just feeds. Shelob is ancient, massive, and terrifying. Frodo and Sam run into her on their way into Mordor. She nearly kills Frodo, stabs him, wraps him in webbing, and leaves him for later. And this wasn't a surprise attack. Shelob let them come in. She likes to play with her food. There's no negotiation or intelligence, just hunger and silk. Lots of silk. Now let's talk about her mother. Ungoliant was not really a spider. She was a being of shadow, maybe a corrupted Maya, maybe something even older. She drank light, not metaphorically, literally. In the First Age, she joined forces with Morgoth. She helped him destroy the two trees of Valinor, the original sources of light in the world. She drained them dry. Afterward, she demanded he feed her the Silmarils, jewels that held the last of that light. When Morgoth refused, she attacked him. Yes, Morgoth, the original Dark Lord, the one Sauron served. He had to call in his Balrogs to save him. That's how powerful Ungoliant was. Eventually, she fled into the south of the world and vanished. Some say she devoured herself. These are Shelob's distant children, not as strong, not as smart, but still terrifying. They fill the forest of Mirkwood with webs, shadows, and venom. Bilbo and the dwarves had to fight them in The Hobbit. Bilbo kills one, names his sword Sting, and goes full stealth mode to rescue his friends. These spiders aren't just big, they're organized. They talk to each other, they hunt in packs, and they were spreading fast before Sauron came back. He didn't create them, but he loved using the fear they caused. Before we get to the big names, we need to talk about cold drakes. Dragons with no fire, no flame, just teeth, claws, and frozen fury. These were mostly found in the Grey Mountains in the north. They destroyed dwarven halls and scattered entire kingdoms. One of the most feared was Scatha the Worm, a huge cold drake who hoarded treasure and fought the Northmen. He was eventually killed by a warrior named Fram, but the dwarves claimed the treasure was theirs. And let's just say, Fram didn't live long after that. You've met dragons, now meet Smaug. Smaug was the last great fire drake in Middle-earth. He didn't just destroy cities, he ended entire civilizations. When he attacked Erebor, the kingdom under the mountain fell in a single day. Dale burned, the dwarves fled, and the gold? Smaug claimed it all. He didn't just hoard treasure, he slept in it. literally embedded in a mountain of gold and jewels. And over time, it hardened like armor, except for one small spot. That weak point would become his downfall. In The Hobbit, Bilbo sneaks into his lair and steals a cup, waking the beast. What follows is one of the tensest scenes in Tolkien's writing. Bilbo hiding in the dark while Smaug sniffs, speaks, and circles like a predator. He wasn't just fire and wings. He was intelligence, arrogance, and destruction wrapped in red and gold. Now this is where dragons start getting scary. Glaurung was the first fire-breathing dragon in Middle-earth. Created by Morgoth during the First Age, he didn't just burn cities, he broke people. He had the power of enchantment. He could look you in the eyes and make you forget who you were, paralyze you with fear, warp your memories. He destroyed the elven city of Nargothrond. He cursed Turin Turambar's family, one of the darkest stories in all of Tolkien's legendarium. Glaurung wasn't just fire and wings, he was mind games. And manipulation. The original father of dragons was a total monster. The biggest dragon ever. Ancalagon was Morgoth's final weapon during the War of Wrath. A dragon so massive when he fell from the sky, his body crushed entire mountain ranges. He breathed fire so hot it turned the sky red. He led an entire fleet of flying dragons and nearly turned the tide of the final battle. It took Arundel, a half-elven warrior flying a magical ship into the heavens, and the Valar's direct help to defeat him. There is nothing in Middle-earth today that even comes close to his power. You already know the scene. Gandalf on the bridge. You shall not pass. But what was that thing? Durin's Bane was a Balrog, a corrupted Maya, basically a fallen angel. He had been hiding deep in the roots of the Misty Mountain since the First Age, sleeping. Until the dwarves of Khazad-dûm dug too deep. He awoke, killed King Durin, took over the halls of Moria, and for centuries, no one dared go back. He had wings of shadow, a whip of flame, and power that could rival a wizard. When Gandalf fought him, it took 10 days, across mountains, through darkness, and into fire. They both died and only Gandalf came back. If Durin's Bane was bad, Gothmog was worse. He was the High Captain of Morgoth's armies, the one who led the Balrogs in the First Age. He personally killed Fëanor, one of the greatest elves to ever live. Then he killed Fingon, High King of the Noldor. This wasn't just brute strength. Gothmog had tactics. He was a commander of monsters. And when he marched onto a battlefield, even elven lords hesitated. He died in the fall of Gondolin, taken down by a half-human warrior named Ecthelion, who stabbed him through the heart with the spike of his helmet. That's how insane the First Age was. You've seen them, you know them. But what are they? The creatures the Nazgul ride, those horrifying winged things, are never given a clear name. Tolkien just calls them fell beasts. They aren't dragons. They have no flame, no scales, just leathery wings, long necks, and hunger. Sauron bred them in secret, and when the Ringwraiths took to the skies, Middle-earth learned to fear the sound of wings. No one knows where the fell beasts came from. Some think they're older than even the Second Age. All we know is that when one of them dies, it hits the ground like a collapsing building. This thing is a mystery. It lives in the lake outside the gates of Moria. It has tentacles, strength, and enough intelligence to wait quietly for victims. When the Fellowship tried to enter the Dwarven city, the Watcher attacked. It grabbed Frodo, nearly crushed him, and then sealed the gate behind them by collapsing the entrance. Nobody knows what it is. Maybe a creature from the depths, maybe something from before the First Age, maybe one of the Nameless Things, finally closer to the surface. It doesn't speak, it doesn't chase, it just waits. One of the most underrated monsters in Tolkien's lore. Thuringwethil was a vampire, or something like it. She served Sauron when he ruled Tol in Garhoth. She took the form of a great bat with iron claws and wore a cloak of shadow. She didn't just look terrifying, she was a spy, a shapeshifter, and a predator. When Luthien infiltrated Sauron's fortress, she used Thuringwethil's skin as a disguise. The idea of vampires in Tolkien's world doesn't show up much, but when it does, it's pure nightmare fuel. If you're building a list of monsters you should never fight, Carcharoth is in the top 3. He was bred by Morgoth as the ultimate werewolf. Bigger than a house, stronger than a troll, and faster than a charging warg. But his most famous act? Biting the hand off Beren, a hand that held one of the Silmarils. Now the Silmarils were holy jewels, pure light, and that light burned Carcharoth from the inside. It drove him mad. He tore across Beleriand in a rage, killing everything in his path. He didn't stop, couldn't stop. He was in pain, dying but still more dangerous than anything alive. It took multiple elves, Beren, Huan the Hound of Valinor, and a lot of blood to bring him down. Ogres aren't as well known in Tolkien's world. He didn't write much about them, but they appear in some early drafts of The Hobbit and were possibly envisioned as massive, crude monsters, somewhere between trolls and men. They never made it into the core stories, but considering what Tolkien built around trolls and orcs, these guys likely weren't friendly. Some believe ogres were just a variation of hill trolls. Others think they were cut from the legendarium to keep things more grounded. Either way, if you see one, don't wait around for a lore lesson. You simply run for your life. Yes, there are giants in Middle-earth. And no, they don't get enough screen time. In The Hobbit, Bilbo and the dwarves witness a storm in the Misty Mountains, except the storm is caused by giants hurling boulders at each other. Just for fun. We don't get names, we don't get motivations, just chaos and thunder. These giants are part of the world's deep magic. They're not aligned with anyone, not good, not evil. They just exist, like earthquakes or volcanoes. And if you see one fighting another across a mountain ridge, don't get curious. Get small. A more direct cousin to the cave trolls, hill trolls are battlefield monsters. They were used in the War of the Ring as frontline breakers, massive brutes who didn't care about formations or strategy. They just charged. Their skin is thick like rock. Their weapons are basically trees, and when you see one running at you, there's not much you can do except pray someone brought an elf with a glowing sword and a lot of luck. Hill trolls don't speak, don't plan or retreat, they just smash. They look like crows, but they're spies. The Crebain are black birds from Dunland and Fangorn, but under Sauron's influence, and especially Saruman's, they became more than just flocks. They became surveillance. In the Fellowship of the Ring, a swarm of Crebain forces the group to hide. They fly in formation. They scan the ground, and they report what they see. They don't fight, they don't kill. But they don't have to. When you're trying to cross Middle-earth unnoticed, 1,000 eyes in the sky are sometimes worse than a blade in the dark. Because once the enemy knows where you are, you're already losing. Goblins are the smaller, faster, sneakier breed of orcs. They're tunnel dwellers, trap setters, inventors of cruelty. The ones in the Misty Mountains nearly kill Thorin's company in The Hobbit, if not for Gandalf showing up with cold steel and fireworks. They build machines, they love cruelty, and they swarm. Fighting one goblin? Manageable. Fighting 30 in a dark mine where you don't know the exits? That's how you end up famous in the worst possible way. The Uruk-hai aren't just buff orcs. They represent a shift in the world, a change in the rules. Saruman created them using foul rituals, possibly blending orc and human blood, and the result was something that marched without rest, killed without fear, and thought for itself. They broke the old idea of what a monster was. They didn't just follow orders, they strategized. They flanked, ambushed, took prisoners, and worst of all, they sang while doing it. Orcs in the Second and Third Ages are dangerous, but orcs in the First Age? Different beast. These were Morgoth's original foot soldiers. War-hardened, more intelligent, and far more dangerous than the twisted masses of Mordor. They were commanded directly by Balrogs, dragons, and sorcerers. And they fought elves who had never known death before. The wars of the First Age were apocalypse-level conflicts, and the orcs were everywhere in them. If you think the orcs in the Two Towers were terrifying, you've seen nothing yet. Now we get to one of the most famous monsters in the entire legendarium. The Witch King was the Lord of the Nazgul, the Black Riders. Once a human king, he was given a ring of power by Sauron, and slowly lost everything. His identity, his will, his body. all that remained was a wraith bound to evil. He became Sauron's top general and ruled Angmar in the north for centuries, bringing war to the kingdoms of men. You couldn't touch him. You couldn't kill him with mortal weapons. He spread terror just by showing up, and in the end, he was taken down not by a warrior, but by a woman and a hobbit. Because no man can kill me has technical limits. The final creature on this list isn't from shadow or flame, but from the raw power of nature twisted into war. The Mumakil, also called Oliphants, were massive elephant-like beasts used by the Haradrim. Towering, armored, unstoppable. They weren't inherently evil, but they were bred for destruction, covered in spikes, carrying war towers, charging through battlefields like mobile fortresses. Legolas brought one down by himself, which is impressive, but also not the standard battlefield experience. If you see a Mumakil coming, you run sideways. So, still breathing? Then you're ready for the next level. Check out the 7 most terrifying monsters of Middle-earth and find out which creature made Morgoth scream, which one could block the sun, and which one Tolkien refused to describe in full. Hit like, and if you're not subscribed yet, do it now, before Ungoliant decides your room's lighting looks a little too luminous. But seriously, she drinks light. That's not a metaphor, it's lore. Anyway, I tried putting together a complete list. Let me know in the comments if I missed anything.